Have you ever wondered how an archangel created as perfect and beautiful could become the embodiment of evil? Lucifer's story is far more complex than the simplistic villain often portrayed. In this video, we trace his journey from the highest heavens to the depths of rebellion, uncovering what ancient texts really say about his fall. You'll discover the pivotal choices that transformed the morning star into Satan. Imagine a being so flawless that he reflected God's glory like a perfect jewel. Lucifer stood as the highest of angels, created with wisdom and beauty beyond any other celestial being. Ancient texts describe him as the anointed cherub who walked on the holy mountain, a being set apart with unique access and intimacy. His very name, Lucifer, carried the meaning light-bearer or morning star, a title representing brilliance, guidance, and honor in the heavenly realms. He was adorned with every precious stone. Gold, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, and emerald covered his form. These weren't merely decorative. They reflected the radiance of the divine presence he served. As worship leader before the heavenly throne, Lucifer directed the praises of creation toward God. His voice and presence orchestrated the eternal chorus of heaven, a responsibility given only to the most trusted and glorious of beings. Yet within this perfection lay a hidden tension. Free will meant that even a being created flawlessly could choose rebellion. The capacity for choice, the ability to turn from worship to self-adoration, existed even in the most exalted of angels. This moral freedom, meant to allow genuine love and service, also opened the possibility of corruption. Some ancient sources suggest Lucifer's role extended beyond music and praise. He may have held authority over the earth itself, acting as a kind of regent or steward of creation before humanity's appearance. This position placed him in a category entirely separate from other angels, closer to the divine yet still created. His wisdom wasn't merely innate, it was honed in the very presence of God, making his understanding of divine order complete. All of this makes his eventual fall not just a rebellion, but a profound tragedy. The being who knew God's glory most intimately, who reflected it most perfectly, would soon seek that glory for himself. The one who led heaven's worship would soon desire that worship be directed toward him. The distance between his original state and his eventual corruption reveals the depth of his choice, a descent from light into shadow that began not with an act, but with a thought. What position did Lucifer hold that made his fall so catastrophic? He wasn't just another angel. Lucifer held unique authority that set him apart from every other created being. Some texts suggest he may have been the angelic regent over earth, a kind of celestial governor entrusted with overseeing creation before humanity's appearance. This would mean he wasn't merely a worshipper or messenger, but held actual administrative responsibility for the physical world. His role potentially included overseeing the worship of all creation toward God. Think about that for a moment. Every bird's song, every wave's crash, every star's movement, all expressions of praise that may have flowed through his oversight. This position gave him tremendous influence over other angels, who looked to him as a model of perfection and authority. His wisdom and beauty made him first among equals, the pinnacle of angelic creation. But authority untested by temptation can become pride. Lucifer's proximity to divine power became the very source of his corruption. The one who stood closest to the throne began to see himself as worthy of sitting on it. His unique access to God's presence and plans didn't produce humility, but instead fostered a sense of entitlement. The responsibility that should have made him more devoted instead made the potential fall. From this exalted height, overseeing worship, governing creation, leading angels, the only direction was down. His rebellion wouldn't be a minor disagreement, but a catastrophic fracture in heaven's order. The very authority that made him magnificent also made his betrayal monumental. This understanding changes how we view his story. Lucifer didn't fall as a minor angel with limited influence. He fell as heaven's prime minister, creation's overseer, and worship's conductor. His position meant his rebellion would echo through all realms, affecting not just heaven but earth, not just angels, but eventually humanity. The seat of power became the seat of pride, and from that elevation the descent began. How does corruption begin in a perfect being? Pride doesn't appear suddenly. It grows gradually, like a crack forming in flawless marble. The first sinful thought was likely subtle and deceptive, a whisper in the mind of heaven's most glorious angel. Lucifer began to admire his own beauty and wisdom, not as gifts from God, but as possessions of his own making. He started comparing himself to God rather than serving God, measuring his own radiance against the divine source of all light. This shift in perspective was made possible by the gift of free will, which allowed him to nurture this thought instead of dismissing it. Imagine standing before a mirror and becoming so fascinated by your reflection that you forget who created the mirror itself. Lucifer entertained the prideful impulse, turning it over in his mind, examining it from every angle. He didn't reject it immediately as a perfect being should have, but instead gave it space to grow. This internal corruption preceded external rebellion. The first sin wasn't an action, but a contemplation, not a declaration, but a consideration. Lucifer's heart began to turn inward, focusing on what he had rather than who had given it to him. His thoughts shifted from gratitude to entitlement, from worship to self-admiration. The tragedy is that he chose to nurture this corruption, water it with his attention, and allow it to take root in his perfect nature. Some ancient sources suggest this process may have occurred over time, not in a single moment. The morning star didn't fall in an instant, but drifted gradually from his orbit, his focus shifting from the sun to himself. He began to see his position not as a trust to be maintained, but as a right to be expanded. His wisdom, meant for service, became a tool for self-justification. His beauty, meant to reflect God's glory, became a reason for self-worship. This internal decay happened while he still stood in God's presence, still led heaven's worship, still appeared perfect to other angels. The corruption was invisible, hidden beneath the surface of his flawless exterior. He maintained his duties while his heart drifted, performing the motions of worship while his thoughts traveled in another direction entirely. This makes his fall not just a rebellion but a betrayal from within the inner circle, a corruption that began where it should have been impossible. The distance between the first prideful thought and the eventual rebellion shows us that sin begins in the mind before it manifests in action. Lucifer's story teaches that even perfection can be corrupted when the will turns inward, when gratitude is replaced by entitlement, and when service is replaced by self-interest. The shadow of pride first fell across his thoughts, and from that shadow grew the darkness that would eventually consume him. What specific declarations revealed Lucifer's rebellion? The book of Isaiah contains the most explicit account of his pride, recording 5 distinct statements that show his deliberate rejection of God. These aren't mere thoughts or private doubts. They are bold pronouncements that mark his complete turning away, showing an escalation of arrogance that moves from ambition to outright blasphemy. The first declaration, "I will ascend to heaven," shows his intention to invade the divine realm. This wasn't about physical movement, but about claiming territory that belonged solely to God. The second statement, "I will raise my throne above the stars of God," reveals his desire for supremacy over other heavenly beings. The stars of God likely refer to angelic hosts, meaning Lucifer sought to rule the very creatures he was created to serve alongside. His third proclamation, "I will sit on the Mount of Assembly," indicates his desire to receive worship. The Mount of Assembly represents the place of divine counsel and judgment, the seat of ultimate authority. By claiming this position, Lucifer wasn't just seeking power, he was demanding the reverence that belongs to God alone. The fourth statement, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds," carries symbolic weight. Clouds often represent God's glory and presence in biblical literature, meaning Lucifer was claiming superiority even over divine manifestations. The final declaration, "I will make myself like the Most High," stands as the ultimate expression of his rebellion. This isn't merely wanting to be near God or like God in character. It's about claiming equality with the Creator himself. The Hebrew term for Most High, Elyon, emphasizes God's supreme authority over all creation, making this statement the most audacious of all. These 5 I wills form a complete picture of rebellion. They show Lucifer rejecting his created purpose and seeking to establish his own kingdom, his own authority, and his own worship. Each statement moves further from his original role, culminating in the desire to replace God entirely. This wasn't a sudden outburst, but a calculated manifesto of independence. The language itself reveals the depth of his corruption. The repeated use of I will emphasizes self-determination over divine will. He speaks of ascending rather than being lifted, of making himself rather than receiving from God. The pronouns shift entirely to self-reference, showing how completely his focus had turned inward. These declarations mark the point of no return. While previous corruption had been internal, these statements represent the externalization of his rebellion. They formalize his opposition to God and establish the foundation for his alternative kingdom. From this moment forward, there could be no reconciliation, only confrontation. The tragedy lies in what these statements replace. The one who once said, "Let us worship," now says, "I will be worshipped." The one who guided others to God's throne now seeks to occupy it himself. The worship leader becomes the would-be worship recipient. The servant becomes the would-be sovereign. These 5 statements don't just reveal pride, they document the complete inversion of his divine purpose. How did Lucifer pervert his sacred role? As worship leader, he possessed intimate knowledge of heaven's praise mechanisms, the patterns, the melodies, the very structure of celestial adoration. This position gave him unique insight into how worship functioned, how it moved from creation to creator, and how it sustained the harmony of heaven. He understood the power of praise better than any other created being, having directed it for eons. Instead of directing praise toward God, he began accepting it for himself. When the worship he orchestrated flowed toward the throne, he started intercepting it, allowing the adoration meant for God to settle upon his own being. This subtle shift required no immediate change in the external forms. The music continued, the praises continued, but the direction and intention changed completely. The one who was meant to be a conduit became a destination. He likely taught other angels to worship. He could have presented this corruption as a new form of devotion, a higher understanding of celestial order. His persuasive abilities, once used to inspire genuine worship, have now become tools for redirecting loyalty. Angels who looked to him for guidance found themselves following a new path, one that led to Lucifer rather than to God. This corruption of worship represents the ultimate betrayal. The one who knew God's glory best, who had stood in the direct presence of divine perfection, now sought that glory for himself. His musical abilities, once instruments of heavenly harmony, became tools of deception. The very songs that had exalted God now exalted the creature over the Creator. He used his deep understanding of heaven's worship patterns to create counter-worship. This wasn't a rejection of worship itself, but a perversion of it, taking the forms and structures of true devotion and emptying them of their proper object. He created a shadow system that mirrored heaven's worship but directed it toward himself. The melodies remained beautiful, the words remained exalted, but the focus shifted from the divine to the created. This transformation shows the depth of his rebellion. Lucifer didn't abandon worship. He hijacked it. He took his highest calling, the most sacred trust given to any created being, and twisted it into the engine of his insurrection. The worship leader became the object of false worship, the conductor became the centerpiece, and the servant became the would-be sovereign. The tragedy lies in how completely he inverted his purpose. The being created to reflect God's glory now sought to absorb it. The one meant to lead others to the throne now blocked the way with his own presence. His corruption wasn't just a personal failure, it was a cosmic distortion of worship itself, setting a pattern that would later echo through human history with idolatry and self-worship. This perversion of worship had immediate consequences in heaven. The angels faced a choice: continue in true worship, or follow Lucifer's new direction. The harmony of heaven, which had flowed through Lucifer's leadership, now became a point of division. The music that had unified creation now created the first spiritual schism. How did one angel convince others to join his cause? Lucifer did not rebel alone. He led a full third of heaven's angels in his insurrection. His deception was convincing enough to sway other perfect beings, each created without flaw, each possessing free will. This was not a rebellion of the weak or the ignorant, but of angels who had known only God's light and presence. Lucifer likely presented his uprising not as rebellion, but as liberation. He may have accused God of withholding glory from his creation, framing obedience as limitation and submission as oppression. His arguments were persuasive because they came from a place of authority and wisdom. As the former worship leader and a being of immense insight, Lucifer spoke with credibility. He could twist truth skillfully, mixing just enough reality with deception to make his lies believable. Other angels faced the same existential choice he had: follow God or follow Lucifer. This decision was not made lightly. Each angel had to weigh loyalty against the enticing vision Lucifer presented. The rebellion created the first division in heaven, a fracture in what had been perfect unity. This was not merely a disagreement over methods or preferences. It was open insurrection, a deliberate and organized rejection of divine authority. The angels who followed Lucifer were not passive followers. They actively chose to align with his vision of self-rule and stolen glory. They traded their positions as servants of God for the promise of becoming gods themselves. Lucifer's corruption spread through heaven's ranks like a spiritual infection. The perfect harmony that had characterized defined angelic existence now fractured into opposing factions. The angels who remained loyal to God faced the painful reality that their fellow beings they had served alongside for eons, had chosen rebellion. This celestial civil war represented more than just conflicting loyalties. It represented competing visions of reality itself, one based on humble service to the Creator, the other on self-exaltation and independence. The rebellion revealed that even perfect beings, when given free will, could choose corruption over obedience. The tragedy was compounded by the scale. So many angels, so thoroughly deceived, so completely turned from their purpose. The insurrection also established patterns that would repeat throughout spiritual history. The corruption of good, the twisting of truth, the presentation of rebellion as liberation. These became Satan's enduring methods. The angelic rebellion set the template for how evil would operate, not through obvious monstrosity, but through subtle deception that makes wrongdoing appear righteous. Heaven would never be the same after this division. The presence of rebellion introduced conflict where there had been only peace, doubt where there had been only certainty, and choice where there had been only harmony. The perfect unity of heaven was broken, and the consequences would echo through creation forever. What was the actual conflict that led to Lucifer's expulsion? Rebellion inevitably leads to confrontation, and heaven became the first battlefield between loyal angels and those who followed the fallen archangel. This was not a physical war, as humans understand conflict. There were no swords or shields, no bloodshed or bodily harm. Instead, this was a spiritual battle, a clash of wills and loyalties that shook the very foundations of the celestial realm. The conflict represented Tud, the ultimate test of allegiance, where every angel had to choose between the established order of God and the promised autonomy offered by Lucifer. Michael the archangel led God's forces against the rebellion, commanding the loyal angels who remained faithful to their Creator. His role was not that of a conqueror, but of a defender of divine order. The confrontation was less about military strategy and more about spiritual authority, a contest between the rightful sovereignty of God and the illegitimate claim of the rebel forces. Lucifer and his angels fought to establish their own kingdom, seeking to overthrow the government of heaven and install themselves as rulers. They attempted to create an alternative system where worship would flow toward them rather than toward God. But created beings cannot overcome their creator. However powerful Lucifer and his followers might have been, they remained finite beings attempting to challenge the infinite. Their rebellion was doomed from its inception, because it fundamentally misunderstood the nature of creation itself. A painting cannot overthrow the painter. A sculpture cannot defeat the sculptor. The very power they used to rebel was power granted by the one they sought to overthrow. This imbalance made the conflict's outcome inevitable despite the seriousness of the rebellion. The battle ended with Lucifer's forces defeated and cast out of heaven. This expulsion was not merely a relocation, but a complete separation from the presence of God. The rebel angels lost their place in the divine order, their access to the heavenly realm, and their original glory. Heaven was purified through this conflict and judgment, restoring the harmony that had been broken by the rebellion. The loyal angels who remained witnessed both the seriousness of rebellion and the certainty of divine justice. This spiritual war established conflict between loyalty and rebellion, between truth and deception, between humility and pride. These themes would replay themselves in human history, reflecting the original celestial struggle. The war in heaven set the stage for all subsequent spiritual conflict, showing that rebellion against divine order always leads to defeat and separation. Yet it also demonstrated that even the most serious challenges to God's authority cannot ultimately succeed against the established order of creation. What does it mean for spiritual beings to be cast out? Expulsion from heaven represents complete separation from God. The fall transformed Lucifer's nature and existence in ways that are difficult to fully comprehend. He lost his place in God's presence, the very environment that had sustained his angelic life. The glory that once radiated from him, the brilliance that made him the morning star, faded and twisted. Where there had been light, now there was shadow. Where there had been harmony, now there was dissonance. His name changed from Lucifer to Satan, meaning adversary or accuser. This wasn't merely a new title, but a redefinition of his entire identity. The light-bearer became the opposer, the worship leader became the slanderer. His beauty, once described in terms of precious stones and perfect proportions, became corrupted into what many texts describe as a monstrous appearance. The radiance that had reflected God's glory now reflected his inner corruption. The external transformation mirrored the internal rebellion. He retained some of his original powers, but now used them for evil purposes. His wisdom became cunning, his persuasive abilities became deception, and his leadership became manipulation. The gifts that had been meant for service were twisted into weapons against his creator. He still possessed intelligence, still could influence spiritual realms, still could appear as an angel of light when it served his purposes. But these abilities were now directed toward destruction rather than creation, toward chaos rather than order. The one who stood in God's presence now dwells in darkness. This isn't merely physical darkness, but spiritual separation, the complete absence of divine light and life. He exists in a state of perpetual opposition, his entire being oriented against the goodness he once served. This fall represents the ultimate spiritual descent, a movement from the highest heights to the deepest depths. The distance between what he was and what he became is the measure of his rebellion. The morning star became the prince of darkness through deliberate choice. Perfection became perversion, not through external force, but through internal decision. Each step away from God, each proud thought, each corrupted worship, each rebellious declaration contributed to this transformation. The being who could have remained heaven's brightest light chose instead to become creation's greatest adversary. His story stands as an eternal reminder that the highest positions carry the greatest risks, and that spiritual rebellion always leads to spiritual degradation. The glory he sought to claim for himself became the very thing he lost completely, replaced by a nature defined by opposition and absence. Where did Satan establish his kingdom after the fall? Expelled from heaven, Satan needed a new realm, and earth became the battleground for his continued rebellion. He established his throne in the spiritual realm over earth, creating a shadow government that operates in opposition to divine order. The Bible describes him as the God of this age and Prince of this world, titles that acknowledge his temporary influence over earthly systems and human societies. These designations don't mean he owns the world, but that he exercises authority over those who choose to follow his rebellious ways. He began corrupting the creation he was governed, and the faithful steward became the canvas for his defiance. His strategy shifted from direct rebellion to subtle deception. Having learned that open confrontation leads to defeat, he now works through persuasion, temptation, and half-truths. He presents evil as good, rebellion as freedom, and selfishness as wisdom. His approach became indirect, working through systems, cultures, and human weaknesses rather than through celestial warfare. He now focuses on turning humanity against their creator. Just as he deceived angels, he works to deceive people, encouraging them to worship created things rather than the creator. He promotes self-worship, materialism, and false ideologies that distance people from spiritual truth. His methods include temptation, accusation, and the distortion of truth. He takes what God intended for good and twists it slightly, creating perversions that maintain enough similarity to truth to be deceptive. Earth became the theater of spiritual conflict, the stage where the battle between divine sovereignty and rebellious independence continues to play out. Every human decision between good and evil, between truth and falsehood, between selflessness and selfishness, becomes part of this larger spiritual drama. The conflict that began in heaven now continues on earth, with humanity as the primary participants. Satan continues his rebellion through human corruption. He doesn't need to force people to do evil. He simply encourages the selfish tendencies already present in human nature. He amplifies pride, fuels hatred, and magnifies fear. His kingdom operates through human systems that prioritize power over service, wealth over wisdom, and temporary pleasure over eternal value. The fallen angel now rules a kingdom of darkness, but it's a kingdom built on deception rather than truth, on stolen authority rather than legitimate rule. His influence remains limited and temporary, but effective within those boundaries. He can suggest but not compel, influence but not control. His power depends on human cooperation with his deceptive suggestions. The spiritual battle continues daily in choices large and small, with the prince of this world seeking to extend his influence while God's kingdom advances through truth, love, and redemption. This conflict will ultimately conclude according to divine timing, but for now, earth remains the contested territory where spiritual loyalties are tested and revealed.